Oh, great. There we go. There we go. Yeah, it's only a couple minutes after, but my talk was originally longer, and I have to cram through it all. So I'm gonna start now. Thanks everyone for coming. I was surprised that they put me in this giant room. So we'll see if some folks wander in. My name is Joe Seppi. I am the developer advocate for IBM in New York City. And I kind of like to tell stories. You can ask my bandmates whenever we're in between songs and I start like, oh, did I ever tell you that time? And they roll their eyes and I end up diverting rehearsal for 10 minutes. But I wanted to share a few stories with you today, including some lessons that I've learned through my long career in technology and web and software development. So you'll undoubtedly have your own experiences, but I hope that, from my stories, we'll have some overlap, and that is kind of how we sort of build empathy between us. So I hope you'll indulge me for a minute, for 30 minutes, while I tell you some stories. So I wanted to start by highlighting a tweet that Justin Searles put out a few days ago. And Justin's a great guy, so don't get me wrong here, but he tweeted, "Almost every programmer you know whose passion, intellect, and skill intimidates you is only even here because they wanted to make video games." That's definitely was not my experience. And I was happy to see that later on he commented that maybe his tweet was a little bit narrow. But for me, I was a long-haired punk and general ne'er-do-well. I actually did pretty well in high school, but I later realized that was only because my high school really sucked. I was woefully unprepared for college. But yeah, when I was young, I kind of maximized my trouble quotient and kind of found it pretty easily. Don't get me wrong, I was a nice enough guy and stuff, but I kind of liked to tempt fate in less than positive ways, including spending my first night in jail at the age of 16, which is a really good story if you want to hear it later. But I was definitely not at home like dissecting my TRS-80 or my Atari or whatever. So what does an aimless teen do after high school? I'm kind of walking you through my life here that kind of leads into my development career, which I'll get to in a minute. So I moved to Boise, Idaho, which a lot of people ask me why, and I don't actually have a very good reason. But a few friends and I decided to move to Boise to start a band. Again, why Boise to start a band? But what was interesting that I found there was this amazing community of musicians and artists. And it was a small kind of city, so we all had to band together to try and make our own scene. There was one all-ages club that we all played at, and whether you were in a metal band or a punk band or a goth band or even an acoustic band, which we had them all and we all played together, we all really worked together on trying to create our own little scene. A lot of us lived together. A bunch of the bands rehearsed in the basement of the house that I lived in. It was really a true community of people invested in seeing each of us do well. So after my time in Boise, I went to Olympia, Washington for a little while, did more punk rock stuff, and was in Bennington for a bit in Vermont. But I ended up moving to Chicago to start a band with some friends that I knew in Olympia. And I'm getting to the tech stuff. So, but when I got there, I kind of, hit the ground running, and it was more of the same kind of routine where I was working for money minimally and working on music kind of maximally. But less than a year or so in, my life was about to kind of gain a new dimension. So our drummer's dad, who was like a VP of a bank or something, he wore suits all the time. I don't know what exactly he did, but he's a nice guy, and he gently encouraged his son to, figure out a career path. We were, I think, mid-20s at this time. And so my friend, our drummer in our band, decided that he was going to learn COBOL, because this is 98, 99, and we had the impending Y2K apocalypse coming that everybody was really freaked out about. And he thought it was a great idea to learn COBOL. Super great guy, generous friend. He offered to pay for me to take the class with him, and that we would get awesome jobs after the class, and then I could pay him back for the class. And while I wasn't necessarily uninterested in computers, I was not interested in COBOL. He could not convince me to go take a class on COBOL. But he did take the class, and he did get a really good job afterwards. I think it was Discover Financial or something. I'm still like fuzzy on his career path, because I don't know how you get from COBOL to really anything else. But after his first day at work, he came home with a laptop, and I started, mashing on the keys and was like, what's this whole internet thing about, right? And luckily, I found the View Source menu item option. And what I saw there wasn't magical. It was, stuff that I could read. Granted, this was, again, like 99, so websites were much more simple, not like today. And I know that that's kind of a conversation that people are having today about, bringing back View Source as I guess in general, the barrier to entry for web development being made lower, like View Source used to be back in the day. But yeah, I found what I saw very accessible, and so like a seed was planted for me to get more into web development. And so from that point on, I took some classes, which were HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Flash, and PHP and MySQL. And I did really well in these classes, so well that actually when they didn't have a teacher for the PHP part, they tried to convince me to teach it. But I didn't actually know PHP, so I said no thank you, and plus I paid for the class. And anyway, I did end up teaching classes later on there and freelanced with some instructors and kind of just generally got my web dev kind of career started. And I was consuming the stuff almost as much as I was making music at this point. I remember being on tour and being in the back of the van reading the Mac OS 9 Bible and general web dev books, and it felt a little odd, but it was really kind of exciting, and I was really stoked about diving into my web dev side of my life. So and then kind of as a side note, like the whole internet thing converged for me in a number of ways. I actually got a job offer to be a roving music journalist for this new website called hardroad.com. If you go to the Internet Archive, you can find it. And it was kind of the time when MP3s were just getting going, and they had this great idea of like featuring independent artists. So I would go and interview bands, and if you go, you'll see a bunch of bands you probably don't know, but I did spend some time with White Stripes, and that's on there as well. So yeah, all of these kind of things came together for me in terms of a web development career. And so this kind of mode of operating went on for a little while. I was basically building websites for my band and our record label and friends' bands and things like that. But I wasn't really making very much money. I was just barely making enough to survive. And in fact, I remember getting paid for one website with an air conditioner to give you kind of an idea of how things were going. But I was having fun. But I at one point, living in Chicago at this point, I moved up to Rogers Park, and I got a dog, and I met this wonderful woman at the dog park who would eventually become my wife. And she recognized that I had some valuable skills, but I wasn't really doing anything with them, so she encouraged me to go out and get a real job and start trying to make use of these skills, earn an actual living. And so I found a job at this web design company, web design and development, which I was actually really surprised that this sort of existed. Again, this is early 2000s, 2003 or so. And, but I was stoked that they were willing to pay me to build websites. And so I get in there, and I didn't know what I was kind of walking into. And granted, this story does not apply to most, hopefully doesn't apply to any except for this particular place, but I didn't realize kind of what sort of a shit show I was walking into. I immediately had like 10 to 15 projects, and half of them people were really already quite pissed off. And but I was able to turn them around and built some stuff and made some people happy. And the people running the company saw that and were like, "Oh, you should manage all of these designers and developers." And what I realized was that there was a sales team that was basically getting these mom and pop shops to sign up, and they were promising them anything that they wanted. They would get half up front, and then they didn't care like what happened. They just were banking on that initial first half. And so all of the engineers and designers all had 10 to 15 projects that they were working on, and everybody had pissed off clients, and it was really insane. But that was kind of only the beginning of it. So I was only there for 6 months, maybe a little bit less than 6 months, but during that time we had 3 different offices. Each one of those offices was regularly visited by police and attorneys. One of those offices was above a meatpacking facility, which smelled terrible, which was fitting because this is Chicago. This is actually Southside Chicago at the time. And our checks started to bounce after a couple of months. And we started going to the currency exchange and the checks cashed here place, and after a couple of pay periods, they stopped accepting our checks as well, and so we were kind of in a position where I had to quit. It was just too much insanity. And interestingly, kind of a bit of a side note, I later came to realize that one of the people that I worked with ended up leading one of the top people at Anonymous. And his name is Jeremy Hammond. There's a big story about him getting investigated by the FBI and all the pseudonyms, and it's really a fascinating story. I worked with him at this place. It was really just crazy. I've got a lot of good stories from that place if you want to hear them later. But one positive thing out of that insanity was it was kind of bonding. I made a lot of friends, one of whom became the drummer in one of my other bands. And he actually later shared something with me, which I'm going to get to in a moment, and it kind of changed my life again. So my next job was actually quite boring compared to the previous one. I was at a marketing agency up in Evanston. We had a really nice, cushy office. It was super boring, though. I was building websites for retirement homes and this place that sold paint. It was like wildly boring, but I had a lot of downtime. I was continuing to kind of hone my skills, right? But it being there, even though it was boring, it planted the idea in my head that, oh wow, somebody is making good money here. We had a really nice office, and I was really surprised that this also could be pretty lucrative. But getting back to the story, I remember clearly my drummer friend messaging me, and this was back in like AIM or Yahoo or something, about these 2 JavaScript projects that were just announced. And it was Prototype and Scriptaculous. And I remember immediately running over to there were only 2 engineers there, and showing him, and we were like, our minds were totally blown. There were like smooth animations, drag and drop, autocomplete, like normalized Ajax. I mean, I know everybody takes that for granted now, but it was like mind-blowing at the time. Before this, JavaScript was like a bastard child, and you were careful kind of going into that minefield. But all of a sudden, there was these frameworks that kind of made things really exciting again. And so being at the sleepy kind of marketing agency and then seeing this, I got kind of shocked into wanting to go and work somewhere that was really challenging and rewarding. So where does one go when they're looking for exciting challenges? You'll remember I went to Boise to start a band. Well, to find excitement, I went to Sears. It sounds silly, but I ended up contracting on a pet project of the new CEO at the time. And the dev team was largely made up of consultants from ThoughtWorks and Optiva. You may know of ThoughtWorks, but Optiva was acqui-hired by Groupon. And like it's just a group of really talented people, smart people, and people who were really passionate about what they were doing. And despite it being this old company, we were very cutting edge. We were practicing Agile kind of in the early days of its popularity. We all pair programmed. We didn't have desks. We just sat at these conference tables and were really fluid in that regard. And we were also using kind of the latest frameworks, jQuery and Ruby on Rails, and we were actually JRuby on Rails because it was Java, but we were doing all sorts of interesting things. And while I took great value from these kind of technology aspects and processes, the biggest impact for me there was the culture. We regularly had brown bag lunch and learns. We often found ourselves in like architectural conversations, design decisions, and things like that. We would attend meetups together, although they were called user groups at the time. we're all happy and motivated to like share knowledge and build up the team together regardless of individual skill levels. And we also had a very diverse team too, which added a great variety of perspective and input. And I found it really a fantastic place to work, which was surprising considering it was Sears. But I keep moving around, and I was drawn back to New York. And so after about 10 years, my future wife and I moved back to New York City. And while I was working remotely for Sears, I needed to find something different. And so I ended up working at IAC Interactive Corp, which owns like Match and Vimeo and College Humor, although they may have sold them at this point, I'm not sure. And I built some stuff for them. I worked at some weird startup doing scheduling. But then I ended up at Credit Suisse, where I learned that a team of 20 is better than a team of 1 when you're building a web-based spreadsheet app for live financial data. They actually hired me to convert a 10-year-old Java app that was like Excel on steroids for live financial data that like business analysts were putting in models, and just it was just crazy. And they hired me to make it into a web app. Fortunately, they saw the light. They hired this company called Lab 49, which is a great like fintech kind of consultancy in New York, full of smart people. And similar to my time at Sears, they brought in agile and processes, and all of a sudden I had a level of sanity and was surrounded by smart people doing great things. We were leveraging Require.js before version 1. Node was all new and shiny that we were excited about. So it was, again, an exciting time, and it kind of harkened back to my days at Sears. And then when the project was wrapping up, I was, again, kind of reinvigorated to go find somewhere that was challenging and rewarding to work. And so I was super excited to find myself at the New York Times. I was honored to walk in that door every day, and I still look back very fondly on my time there and have a lot of great friends there. However, their tech stack was so far in the past. It was so bad. I mean, granted, this was a few years ago. Now things are much better, which I'll get to in a minute. But they were literally operating their site like a newspaper. Once an article was printed, was published, you had a little bit of time to kind of edit it and make some adjustments, but basically you could not touch the underlying libraries or frameworks or anything. It was almost like they printed out it on a piece of paper and stuck it in a filing cabinet. It was really crazy. And it was kind of embarrassingly bad. And coming from this my time at Credit Suisse, where we were really pushing things from day one at the New York Times, I was trying to get us to have a more modern stack. And eventually, we got the green light to re-platform the kind of underlying applications powering the New York Times. And it was also exciting because they were doing some stuff in Node a little bit, so the video section of the site, and we were going to do some of the main part of the application in Node as well. They unfortunately looked around and saw a bunch of PHP engineers and changed their mind. But it was exciting for a short time there in terms of building stuff out in Node. But again, what I found most valuable at the Times was the community of developers there, from the newsroom team, which included Jeremy Ashkenas, David Nolan, Bostock, some really awesome engineers, and then also all the platform engineers up on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floor with me. And so as the team grew, and as I mentioned, we were on a few different floors, I came up with a couple of initiatives to kind of foster community internally at the Times. And so one of them was this internal meetup we called the Regular JavaScript Gathering, where we would meet every Thursday for like a lunch and learn. I largely sourced it internally with engineers at the Times, but I did bring in a few external folks, Tom Hughes Croucher, Rebecca Murphy, Spike Brem, Dominic DiNicola, I think a couple others. But it was 20 to 30 people were there every week. I did it for over a year. It was really a great thing. I was excited about it. And then we also did this thing called JavaScript in the Afternoon, where we worked in this large conference room on the newsroom floor. And there would be like 40 people. This was when Turntable FM was around, so we'd all make fun of each other's music taste. But generally, it kind of fostered some internal community. This was before Slack, so if you had a problem, you could raise your hand and be like, "Oh, anybody work on the paywall? I'm having trouble," and somebody would be in the room that could help. So it fostered a sense of team unity and positive morale within our development team, and we're also I'm looking at time, I need to kind of hurry up. But my time there kind of came to an end. I was actually going to do a DevRel position there, but the board did a freeze on internal movement, and I got a job offer elsewhere. So I ended up at a fintech startup for a bit, and then I found myself at Behance, which is a creative network was recently acquired by Adobe at the time. And everywhere I go, starting from the Sears time, like I would start to do DevRel stuff and try to do community work, which was really exciting to me. And there, I got this job offer internally to do three things: to be an engineer, an engineering manager, and do like developer relations. It should have been a red flag that there were these three things, but I was kind of excited about the combination. Oh, I can do a third of each. But in reality, they wanted me to still do 90% engineering, so that kind of didn't work out. But the opportunity, or at least the thought of the opportunity, inspired me to really try and figure out exactly what I wanted to be doing. And I've like coached other developers in the past on like career development, so it was time to like practice one of the things I suggest, in that like imagining the perfect role for you. And then trying to find that. And so this is what I really wanted to do. I wanted to do developer relations remotely, working on JavaScript and Node. I wanted to do open source coding and community work. I wanted to still code as much as possible, and I wanted to do it for a good company. I thought it was a pretty tall order, but I actually found this job as a developer evangelist with StrongLoop, who was at the time recently acquired by IBM. And I thought it was too good to be true, but I like gave it my all in the interview, and I must have done a good job because they not only hired me, but they gave me the lead position. So I was like super excited, and I was able to really start doing more Node development kind of as my day job. Because at the New York Times, they ended up not doing it. At Behance, actually, we had a greenfield app, and the same thing happened. They looked around and saw a bunch of PHP engineers and decided to not use Node. However, both at the Times and at Behance, I believe the New York Times, I know, is really embracing Node, and I believe the project we're on at Behance is also converting a lot of it to Node after all. So, and actually just yesterday, I got promoted to city leader in New York City, so I'm super excited about that. But anyway, these are all great stories, or I guess great is subjective. But what's my point? So I'm hoping that you maybe grabbed a couple of these things out of my stories, but basically I'll run through what I've kind of taken from my career in web dev. So search out new challenges, find ways to continue to grow and push yourself. The world of web dev like moves at such an amazing clip that it's hard to keep up, but it's kind of exciting, I think, to keep up. Community and diversity are critical. Like each of the places where I found great community, there was also great diversity, and I believe that we were a much better team because of it. Beat back imposter syndrome, which I still deal with every day. Like this big room, I was like, why are they putting me in the big room? I'm just me. So do your best to like recognize your own discouraging thoughts and discard them. Like kind of acknowledge them and put them aside. It's good to be self-critical, but that imposter voice is really super unhelpful. Assume that you are as good as you seem, and even better yet, assume that you are better than you seem, because you probably are. I'm talking to myself a lot here. You don't need to be an expert to excel, You don't need to have a CS degree to be a software engineer. My colleague and I were joking the other day because we were driving up to Cornell to talk to students about career advice, and we are both dropouts. So that seemed kind of ironic and maybe not a good idea. I mean, I think we have good advice. But, and also I'd add to that too, in terms of like not needing to be an expert to excel. Also in like open source software development, it's not all technical too. So, if you're interested in that, there's like, project management and docs and issue triage and just like so many ways that you can contribute to open source. So if you're interested in that, I strongly suggest it. And then like look for growth in all situations, whether it's a positive or negative experience. There's always something to learn and grow from, whether it's like learning what to do or what not to do. Definitely have your radar tuned to wisdom. And then, of course, always bet on JavaScript. from that scriptaculous day, I was all in on JavaScript. And then, as I mentioned, a couple of those companies decided to not do Node, and now they are doing Node. So always bet on JavaScript. And perhaps more importantly, always bet on yourself. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you for listening to my stories. If you want to hear any more of them, come talk to me because I like telling stories. Thanks.